Welcome to the third episode of Let's Map with OSM. In this episode, we're going to map the farmlands around this village. So I selected my fast draw tool and I started drawing an outline around the largest farmland that I could see. Now the thing about farmlands is that you cannot just map one single piece of land and then just call it a land use as a farmland. What you generally do as a practice is that you take out the entire area which you can possibly see which is used as a farmland and then denote that as a land use called farmland. Now, one of the reasons why we do this, especially in countries like India, is because the farms or the individual farms, as you can see, are quite small in nature and they're quite fragmented. So fragmented farms means that that particular area has been divided amongst families or members of one family through generations, due to which the individual patches are much smaller than what you would expect. Now, one of the things that you need to remember over here is that accuracy may not actually be key when you're mapping land use features. You just need to get the general outline right. So if you make a mistake, remember that it's okay to make a mistake. You just commit this feature, and over here I'm just going to add a tag called as land use equal to farmland, and then that's it, right? It's always possible to edit the boundaries later, and even if you make a single mistake and then you realize it much later, you can always come back and edit it, right? This edit that you're going to make, you're going to commit, it's going to the database. And once it goes to the database, it's there to stay. And once it's in there, anyone can actually edit it, add more features to it, make it a bit more granular, or even change the tags for it. So one of the challenges that I faced while I was mapping this particular area of interest is that the farmlands seem to be quite disjointed from each other, and it's not particularly clear which part of an area is a farmland and which is not. Many of these farmlands are surrounded by hedges and by walls, but whether those walls are built a long time ago, whether they're new, whether it's still in use, whether it's in disuse now, what kind of crops grow there, what is the growing cycle, all of this information is something that is not available to us right at this moment. But what we can do is, we can just take the best approximation of what we feel is a farmland around these parts, map it, and then just give a very generic tag. Now, as you can see, what I did over here is some of the boundaries of the farmland have gone into the forested area, and that's okay. I can just come back and adjust the boundaries a bit later. I shouldn't worry too much about if something intersects or not, as long as I correct it. Right, there we go. That looks a bit better, doesn't it? In this area, as you can see, a lot of the ground is black. There are possible reasons for that. One is that it's a black soil area. There are regions of the country which are covered by black soil. But the more possible explanation is that this area was recently burned by the locals. So what the locals do is these regions of grassland in between forests, they usually set fire to it because that helps the grasses then to grow back, and it does help maintain the fertility of the soil and to also prevent open land from being taken over by jungle bush. So by burning, what you can see is a stubble of the grass that once stood there, and the walls that you can see around the farms could also potentially be a barrier against the soil that was burned. But more information about this, you'll only find it once you actually visit the land and do a field study. But for the purposes of this exercise, since there's actually nothing mapped at all in and around these parts, we'll just map the farmlands for now. So in this particular feature that we are mapping, what you can see is there's a large central body where there seem to be farms that are actually being used, because you can clearly see the outlines of the patches of land or the parcels of land. But for the rest of it, you can see that it's demarcated probably for agriculture, but it's maybe not really being in active use at the moment, or at least when the image was taken. What I like about the fast draw tool is that it allows me to place these vertices really close to each other and then just move them around whenever I make a mistake here and there. If I just go on clicking and trying to make the boundary of an area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these weird jagged polygons. Now, when you're mapping all of these land use layers, sometimes you'll find other features such as buildings in there. So you take the possible outline of the building, just make it rectangular and just tag it so. A building can exist within a different land use. So the concept of a land use is that you're trying to denote what is the purpose of the land that is underneath this particular area. Does it have a specialized purpose? So for example, if there are a lot of industrial buildings in this area, we would take that entire swath of land and we'll call it land use equal to industrial. If it is just filled with houses and residential complexes, what we'll do is we'll call it land use equal to residential. Another more common practices in Indian mapping is a lot of Indian villages have a lot of households that are really close to each other, so they're not very spaced widely apart, meaning that it's quite difficult to map individual buildings like we saw in the last episode. So the land use residential tag is something that really comes in handy during these circumstances. And it's because you can just tag an entire area and you can demark it as residential land use, give the name of the village if you know it, and be done with it. So that tells people that, okay, look, there are people living over here in this place called so and so, but we don't know much more about it. So then someone who has better access or an understanding of the capabilities to map these individual buildings, they can then do so. Throughout this exercise, what we're going to do is we are actually going to take the effort to map every single building that's there in the village as much as we can. If there are certain buildings we are not really sure about, maybe they're partially obscured, maybe you can't really understand what the outline of the building is, then we might just leave it. But to a large extent, we are going to continue mapping the buildings. Now this is an interesting area because you can see a building over here, and on the right you can actually see the areas that are burnt out by fire because they're very, very dark and they're properly black. So that was probably the results of a fresh fire. And once it's cleaned up, it'll probably be replanted. Okay, so this is interesting. So what you're looking at is essentially a makeshift cricket ground. It's an area of the farmland that has probably been cleared up to make an area where people can play cricket. The thing is, looking at the cricket ground, I'm pretty sure that the central area or the central line that you can see is a pitch, and the white line surrounding it is probably the boundary. But at the same time, what I can see is that there's a larger area that has been cleared out. So maybe it could be used as a venue to host larger matches within the district or the taluka. So what we're going to do is we're going to tag this as leisure equal to pitch and sport equal to cricket. The area around the cricket pitch is still a farmland. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue mapping. Now, one of the things that you'll have realized by now is if the surrounding area is a farm and the cricket ground is in the middle of the farms, does it still come under a land use of agriculture or farming the way it applies to a building? Well, the answer really is no. So there's a special relation that's called a multi-polygon that will apply to this. I'll show you how to do this towards the end of the video. Right, back to the cricket ground. So to make it a multi-polygon, all you really need to do is select it, go to tools and say create multi-polygon. So what it's essentially going to do is it's going to create a relation saying that the cricket ground is inside the farmlands, but both are mutually exclusive of each other. Right, so that's it for today's episode. We covered a lot of farmlands around the village that we mapped last time. In the next episode, we'll move on to the village of Killavadi and then get into the details. See you next time, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends.